Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. No End to Days. Episode 5. No End to Days. A Chinese vase shattered against a wall in a living room cast in shadow. Vicken gathered his breath and collapsed into a lounge chair. Through gritted teeth he snarled, "Where is she?" Perhaps Rode had trouble with the awakening, Gavin attempted to rationalize. "Nonsense," Vicken spat. "She was never here. Or if she was, it was not for long." He got up and paced back and forth. They stood in the library. Every single book on the monstrous shelves was a book on the occult, a book on history, or a subject the Coven felt was relevant to learn. "I spent years perfecting it." A fire roared in the corner of the room. The Coven sat in a semicircle, though 2 chairs were empty, Vicken's and mine. Vicken was pacing. His gait was smooth, and he held his hands behind his back. He looked positively decadent in his designer clothes and modern haircut. In his hand was a charred piece of paper, and on it, one word, Wickham. His hands were covered in dirt and some had collected under his fingernails. He had been digging in the soil with his bare hands. "Perhaps she's dead," Gavin said again. "Fool! Don't you think we would feel it?" Vicken asked. Heath nodded, and Song grunted in agreement. "Have we compiled the research?" Vicken asked. "I want you to go through it again. I want to know every possible definition of whoever or whatever this Wickham is. I think Rode is dead." "I feel that," Gavin said. It was Vicken's turn to nod. "And no one has heard from or seen Sullivan?" Vicken asked. "He has ignored all of our attempts at communication." "Do you think he would honestly show himself to us?" Heath asked. "He does not meddle in these matters. He is the only one who could answer my questions." "Not the only one," Song said. "There are others who could help. I wouldn't call upon anyone else unless I had no other choice," Vicken explained. "Besides, Sullivan is intimately connected. He knows Rode." There was a collective silence. "It's time," Vicken said, and sat back in the chair. "We're going to find her." I gasped and opened my eyes. The cold breeze from the window brushed my right cheek. I had leaned my head against the window and had fallen asleep before the entrance to the highway. Then I felt a squeeze on my left knee. I looked at Justin, and the images from my dream seemed to evaporate. "You've been asleep for an hour," he said. When I looked out the windshield, I saw that we were back in Lover's Bay. We turned onto one of the driving paths through Wickham, and Justin pulled his car into the spot in front of Seeker. He had dropped everyone off at their dorms and I had slept right through it. "Did you dance at all?" he asked, and opened the SUV's sunroof. I looked up at the early fall sky. "That was one of the best times I've ever had," I said, and leaned back into the seat. "I wish Tony had been there," I admitted, and brought my hand to my hair. I nervously attempted to make sense out of the straggly and sweaty parts stuck to my shoulders and forehead. I smiled after pulling my hair back. "But thank you," I said. "Can we go again next week?" Justin threw his head back and laughed out loud. He squeezed my shoulder with his right hand, then we were quiet for a minute. I listened to the sounds of Wickham at night. Somewhere in the distance tiny waves rolled onto the Wickham beach shore. "There's been something I've wanted to ask you for a while," he said, and he moved his hand, which was still on my shoulder, and pressed on my back so I would lean forward a bit. "What does your tattoo mean?" he asked. The question was out of the blue, yes, but if I could tell anyone, it was Justin. I supposed he had never asked me before out of respect. Or maybe he didn't want to know the truth. I took a breath. "Long ago, Rode, the vampire you recognized in the photo, was a member of a brotherhood of knights. Sometime in the 14th century, men, healthy men, were dying from the Black Plague. Huge pustules would cover the body. Children endured pain beyond belief. After seeing the devastation of the Black Death, Rode decided to become a vampire. That complete story, I do not know, but when he returned he told his lord, King Edward III, what he had done. It is not easy to hide a vampire transformation." "Why?" Justin asked, his hand still on my back, only now his thumb was rubbing my skin. "We look different in vampire form. Our features take on an ethereal look. The amazing part of Rode's tale is that King Edward accepted Rode. Imagine discovering that your favorite knight, your number one, decided to join the ranks of the devil. When Rode returned and told his lord what he had done, Rode said, 'Evil be he who thinketh evil,' and thus the phrase was born. For Rode, death was the ultimate." I stopped. My voice was breaking. I swallowed hard, and my eyes burned. I blinked a few times, and the burning went away. I looked up at Justin, whose smile had faded, though his exhausted features calmly looked into mine. Death was not something he could face. So he protected himself from it, I finished. He became a vampire so he would never die. I looked out the window. The long, winding path to the right of Seeker was dark and the trees swayed. Such peace lay outside the window. "But he died for you," Justin said. "Yes, he did. Anyway, that phrase, 'Evil be he who thinketh evil,' became the calling card of the Order of the Garter, which still exists in England to this day. It also became the motto of my coven. Though I bastardized it to no end. I brought my legs up to my chest and rested my chin on my knees. I looked at the dashboard until all the small dials and lights were a blur. Rode really believed that, to be evil, you had to wield it. Mean it. From your soul. Did you?" Justin asked. "Yes." In my mind's eye I was looking at Rode on the couch of my living room. His sunken cheeks and his strong masculine jaw were so bony, so breakable. And the blue of his eyes had already burned its color into my blood years before. But that night they had dimmed. I would still recognize that color anywhere, in flowers, in the sky, and in all the minutiae of the world. I tried to swallow but suddenly found that I couldn't. I had to get out. Justin's SUV was too small. I was too small. I was going to burst out of my skin. "I should go," I said, opening the door. I stepped into Seeker's parking lot. Justin rolled down the window and called after me. "Hey, Lena. Wait." I heard the motor go silent, the driver's side door open and close, and the thud of Justin's shoes thump on the dirt behind me. I turned to face him and I clenched my fists. The lights from Seeker Hall illuminated the benches and dorm entrance behind me. I must have been a scary sight because Justin stopped 2 or 3 feet from me. My jaw was set in a hard clench, my eyes squinted down at the ground, and I was breathing like a bull, through my nose. "What is it?" he asked. "What did I say?" "You didn't do anything." "It's me. I want to burst out of my skin. Take my mind and throw it into another body. I want to forget everything I've done up until 2 months ago." I was saying all of this through clenched teeth. Spit came out of my mouth, but I didn't care. Justin's eyes reflected pure panic. His mouth dropped a bit, and he scanned the ground and said, "It's like bungee jumping." "What?" This was perplexing, to say the least. "You're standing there on a bridge and you know you're about to do something supremely stupid. But you do it, anyway. You have to feel something. Because doing something that crazy is better than just standing around living life with all your mistakes and stupid responsibilities. You jump because you have to feel that rush. You know you'll lose your mind if you don't. You're saying that deciding to be human again after 600 years as a ruthless vampire is like bungee jumping." We were silent for a moment. "You don't see the connection." I couldn't help laughing. How did he do this? How could he make me see it this way? In the deepest moment of turmoil he'd made me realize that this life, the one I was in now, was full of laughter and happiness. I threw my arms around Justin's neck and kissed him so deeply that when he moaned I could feel the vibration of the sound and it sent a chill through my body. I could feel it in my toes. I kissed the nape of his neck and the small space between his neck and shoulder. Then I pulled away so there was only an inch or 2 between us. "Come upstairs with me," I whispered before I even knew what I was really saying. Justin's eyes widened. He smiled so his dimples were deeper than I'd ever seen them before. "Are you sure?" I nodded. I was sure. After sneaking by the guard, Justin met me at the top of the stairs and I stood in front of the door. I slipped a finger into the bushel of rosemary at the door and took out a single leaf. I handed it to Justin. "Press it. Keep it in your wallet. When you look at it you'll remember tonight." Soon we were standing face to face in the middle of the living room. Around me were the talismans of my life, the sword, the photos, the vial of rose dust around my neck. "I'm glad you know the truth," I whispered. "You don't know, you can't know, what tonight meant for me on that dance floor." Justin stepped forward and cupped his hand on my right cheek. Sheets of shivers rolled down my arms. Glorious touch. Justin's touch, one that I wasn't sure I could live without now. "I love you, Lena," he said. I was shocked to see his eyes were watery. "I've never said it to a human before," I said, and looked down at the floor. I wouldn't dare look at the bureau, where Rhoda's eyes would meet mine. This was a different love, one that I could feel with my beating heart. "It's okay. You don't have to say it," Justin said, and leaned forward to kiss me again. I placed a hand on his chest to stop him and stepped back. I had to remove Rhoda's remains from my neck. A respect thing. Maybe a vampire thing. I placed the necklace on the coffee table. When Justin kissed me and then lifted me up so my legs wrapped around his waist, I knew he was headed toward my bedroom. Once we entered the room, Justin kicked back his leg and shut the door. Chapter 22. Lena. Justin whispered. He was stroking my head with his hand. My head was on his chest, and I listened to his heart beating, recuperating back to a normal speed. Outside, the sky was filled with stars. Yet, I replied. I was dozing, almost asleep under my warm and fluffy comforter. Will you go to winter prom with me? Of course, I whispered, sure I would fall asleep in moments. Justin. He said, moments from sleep himself. What's a prom? He laughed so hard that my cheek bounced up and down on his chest. The late morning light shone through the bedroom window curtains. Something looked different. The things in my room seemed fuzzy. I rubbed at my eyes and slipped away from the bed as quietly as I could. Justin was still asleep, stomach down, so only his bottom half was covered by the comforter. I pulled a nightgown off a hanger from my closet. I slipped the black cotton dress over my head and rubbed my eyes until I approached the bay window in my bedroom. It was then that I noticed how different my world had become in one night. Trees looked solid. I couldn't distinguish the fibers in the bark. Blades of grass moved in the wind by the thousands, but their individual sways and vibrations were indistinguishable to my eyes now. I could see the beach in the distance, but the details in the sand were muted and blurry. I could no longer see the chips in the paint of the chapel across campus. I rubbed my eyes again, but the view remained the same. Rode was right, I had lost my vampire sight and finally become the human he had dreamt that I would be. I think hours passed as I sat on the window seat and looked out at the campus. At one point, I wrapped my shoulders in a blanket and just stared and stared. Then I heard the sheets rustle behind me. Lena? Justin asked, but he was sleepy. I turned my body to see him in the bed. His hair was messy, and his chest was bare. He held the sheets over his bottom half and joined me on the window seat. I turned back and kept staring out the window. He looked out the window and then at me. What is it? I turned my head to meet his eyes. It's gone, I said, returning my gaze to the much different view out the window. What? What is? My vampire sight. Justin sighed. Wow. There was a moment of silence. Is it my fault? I almost laughed aloud, but I didn't. Instead I smiled and said, no. I refocused on the glittering ocean and the blurry rolls of the waves. Maybe this is why humans are so caught up in their own thoughts, I said, still keeping my gaze forward. They can't see what the world is really like. If they could, they would look beyond their own dreams and preoccupations. I looked at Justin when he didn't say anything. His eyes, those green wild eyes that were always looking for the next daredevil trick, were still and calm. I love you, Lena. I took a breath. It was my choice to love now. My choice to decide if I meant it or not. No curse binding me for all of eternity. I love you, too. With that, Justin leaned forward and took the blanket from off my body. In the 3 weeks that passed after Halloween, fall turned to winter very quickly. When everyone else went inside to get warm, so did Justin and I. We had become virtually inseparable. My thoughts of the coven were becoming more and more distant. Perhaps Soliane was wrong. Perhaps they had overlooked the ashes in the fireplace. maybe Solien was given the wrong information? It's amazing what you can convince yourself when you want to hide from the truth. I was watching a lacrosse practice at the end of the season. It was only days before Thanksgiving break and soon practices would be moved inside. Music echoed from dorms. Students walked across the meadow and to and from the greenhouse. I no longer kept flowers in my pockets. The only trinket I kept was the vial of Rhodes' remains around my neck. That day, I sat on the edge of the lacrosse field. I rested a notebook on my knees while finishing up a draft on an English paper. Justin ran up and down the length of the field, tossing the ball from the cradle of the net and back with other lacrosse players. Claudia, who was walking back from the union holding a coffee for me and a tea for herself, sat down on my right. Tony Sasaki is leaning against Hopper. Staring over here. I took the coffee and turned to look. A large oak tree stood tall next to the Hopper door. Except now, like the rest of the trees on the campus, it was starting to lose its leaves and only a few branches grasped onto drooping red and orange leaves. There was Tony, with a black knit cap pulled over his hair. He met my eyes and motioned with a quick wave of his hand for me to come toward him. I pushed up from the ground. "I'll be back in a bit," I said to Claudia, whose eyes said she knew that whatever Tony wanted to talk to me about, it probably wasn't good. He had kept up his icy demeanor for weeks now. "Hey," I said, though I looked down at my coffee and then up at Tony's eyes. "Can I talk to you about something?" he asked, but his mouth was set tight and he looked directly into my eyes. "You haven't wanted to talk to me for about a month," I said. A blast of icy wind whipped my hair around my mouth and cheeks. I gripped the coffee cup. 3 weeks, actually. "Come inside," Tony said, and turned to walk into Hopper. I glanced back at the field. Justin was turned toward me and in response, I shrugged my shoulders. I followed Tony inside. Tony's feet made his particular rhythm as he walked up the twisting stairs toward the art tower. I knew the heavy shuffle of his feet and the way that his boots sounded on the wood. I followed behind, my feet making considerably less noise even though I was wearing boots, too. When we walked into the art tower, Tony crossed the floor and turned left. The portrait was now framed and hanging on the wall. Tony stood to the right of an easel. Behind him were the large, open cubbies where students stored their pens and supplies. Tony's cubby was hidden behind the easel. "So, what do you want to talk about?" I asked, still only a few steps into the room. I crossed my arms over my chest. I had to know. Doesn't make it right, but I had to know. "I mean, all this time. There was something different about you," Tony said, as though he was rationalizing it to himself. "What?" "When you started spending all that time with the three-piece and Justin. It wasn't you. At least, I didn't think you liked the kind of people who made fun of everyone else." "Of me?" "I got to know them, Tony." "You hung out with them." "They're not bad, especially Justin." "You made me hang out with them." "I didn't want to." My cheeks got hot, and I didn't want to look at Tony. His fingers, covered in their usual paint and charcoal, pushed the easel so the wooden legs made a scratching sound on the floor. Behind the easel a red velvet curtain covered Tony's cubby. "What is this?" I asked. Tony pulled the curtain to the right. Inside the cubby was a stack of 8 or 9 books. At the top was a thick, hardcover book that looked very familiar. The metal cover, the gold leafing on the pages. It was the order of the Garter book from the library, and on top of it was the photo of Rode and me. You tell me, Lena. I know it's wrong. I know it is. And I'm not crazy or anything. But when I ran out that day, after I told you I loved you, Tony said, taking the book and the photo from the cubby and putting them on an art desk, a couple of weeks ago, I was organizing my pictures, filing them away, whatever. In every single one, you're so pale. I mean, you're physically hiding from the sunlight. That was my first clue. So, I went to your room and I knocked on the door. But you hadn't locked it. So I turned the knob, thinking maybe you didn't hear me. I went inside to wait for you. I sat on your couch and waited to apologize for just springing it on you when I told you. He paused. When I told you I loved you. And that's when I saw this. There was a red ribbon page marker in the book, and when Tony opened it, I felt my heart start to race in my chest. Tony used his index finger to open the book to the page with the engraving of Rode. I gasped, a hiccuping gasp, the kind where you can't catch your breath fast enough because the shock is too great. This book was open on the table. I had seen it before but never made the connection. So I looked at the page you had left it open to. And then by sheer coincidence I looked up at your bureau. There was the same guy in a photo looking back at me. You stole them from me? When? Just a few days ago. I was desperate. I wanted to talk to you, be friends again, but once I saw this, things just got out of control. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Tony pointed at the engraving. Explain this to me, Lena. How could a guy who was alive in 1348 be the same guy in this photograph with you? And the swords on the wall. The vial of dust around your neck. You live in Professor Bennett's old apartment. You hate sunlight. How could you? I whispered. My ears were hot. My fingers shook. You won't even talk to me. You stopped being my friend. Tony fired off symptom after symptom, all of my secrets. Then he took off his hat and ran his hands through his hair. I was in the doorway. My breath was heaving, my eyes wide. I could feel the sweat gathering under my hat. Are you? Jesus, he took a breath. Are you a vampire? I said nothing, we were locked in a stare. Outside somewhere students were blasting music and chattering with one another. I licked my lips. Everything felt dry. Come on, Lena. You sat in the shade all fall, you still do. You know about bloodstreams, biology, and dissecting cats. Stop it. You like knives. The first day I met you, you said you knew 25 languages. I heard you speak at least 10 of them. I said, stop it. You are. Admit it. There was a rage in me that had been waiting so long to come out that when I raced across the room and slammed Tony into the wall of cubbies behind him, I was sure he wasn't prepared for it. I pinned him by the throat with my forearm. He probably could have thrown me off, but instead Tony's brown eyes stared into mine and his mouth parted in shock. You want to know the truth? You want to know what I think? That you're a pathetic, love-struck boy who's jealous. You're already full of superstitions. This just feeds into it. You love me? You think you know me? I let him go and backed away, not moving my eyes from his. I snatched the photo off the table. Tony rubbed at his neck where I had pinned him to the wall. You were my friend, I said. I let the stare linger between us and then I turned and ran from the art tower as fast I could. Chapter 23. Wickham Beach was deserted, but I sat on the stone wall, anyway. The swells were small, but they hit the beach in a comforting rhythm. There were white caps on the bay. I knew the reality of what happened. If Tony had discovered my secret, it would only be a matter of time before everyone else would. I decided in the time it took to run from Hopper to the beach that I would go to a bank and store my vampire photos and treasures in a lockbox. It was time to redecorate my apartment. I unclasped the vial of Rhodes' remains from around my neck and held them up to the sun. They glimmered and shined as brightly as they had on the day that he died. I toyed for a moment with the idea of putting the necklace in my pocket, but I wasn't prepared to lose a piece of Rhodes. Not yet. So I clasped it around my neck. Redecorating my apartment would have to be good enough for now. Then, someone sat down beside me. I was completely distracted by my thoughts, so I didn't realize that someone had been walking toward the beach wall. A few months before, I would have been able to sense it, but everything had changed so much. It was Tony. I am a world-class a-hole, he said. I didn't say anything. A vampire. Tony scoffed. What was I thinking? I don't know, I said, though I couldn't help the burning shame that resided in my chest. I hated lying to him again and again. I got desperate, I guess. And you're right. I'm too superstitious. I nodded. But what about that guy in the photo? He looks just like the guy in that engraving. I left the photo in my back pocket. It's a drawing, Tony. A coincidence, maybe. Coincidence, he said. Drop it, okay? I'm just an ordinary girl. Tony nodded. Buy you a coffee, he offered. Yeah, I said, and Tony stood up. He offered me his hand and he pulled me up from the cold stone wall. I wanted to tell Tony, believe me. But with the warning from Solian and the coven on my trail, I had to maintain silence. For myself. Tony and I sat down at a table in the middle of the union. Did I mention I'm sorry, he said, and placed his tray down across from me. On it was a steaming mound of turkey with gravy and a salad. About 400 times. He took a heaping bite of his turkey, so he looked like a little kid attempting to put too much in his mouth. I missed you, he said after swallowing. His cheeks reddened as he said it. I smiled and looked down at my plate. When I shifted my gaze, I caught a glimpse of Tony's boots under the table. Hey, I want to ask you something, I said. What? He said, and a piece of lettuce came out of his mouth and onto the plate. Are your boots new? How long have you had them? I've always kind of wanted a pair of combat boots. Tony swallowed. It's funny, actually. I lost one boot last summer. But I got real lucky. I went back to the shoe store and they were selling the same boots for 50% off. So I bought them again and put the other boot in my fish tank at home. Guppies loved it. Suddenly, Tony stiffened. He dropped his fork and stared behind me. I turned and followed Tony's eyes. Tracy walked by with a collection of girls from the senior class who usually gave me dirty looks because of my new association with Justin Enos. "Tony," I said. He just kept staring. Then something happened I couldn't believe. Tracy turned her head and smiled at Tony. Not a big smile, but a sly smile. One that said, "Well, come and get it." I leaned forward. "Tony," I whispered. His eyes snapped down to his plate. "Are you dating Tracy Sutton?" "No," he said with a mouthful of food. "Liar," I said with a smile and started to dig into my own food. There was an air of mischief in Tony's eye and something felt right with the world. Well, she may have come and said hi to me the other day. And a couple days after that. Do you actually trust her? She's not so bad, Tony said with a shrug and took another bite of his food. You spend time with her? And have actual conversations? Tony kept looking at his plate. You're in love, I said, and smiled. Tony put down his fork. No way. I laughed and took a bite of my own food. Lena, shut up. I am not. Sure, I said, laughing still. There was a moment of silence, then Tony said, I still have pics of her in her bikini. I almost spit out my food on my plate. Yes, something was finally right again in the world. Chapter 24. A snowball came whizzing toward my face and smacked me square in the forehead. Claudia and Tracy fell back onto the mountains of snow that covered Wickham campus. They held their stomachs from laughing so hard. Tony was forming another snowball as I wiped my face with my warm mittens. It was December 15th, and the night of the Wickham winter prom. In a couple weeks it would be winter break and I was staying on campus for the holidays. It wasn't safe to stay too far from campus. Now that Newt Rouge was over and after that lovely dream on the way back from the club, I had to stay as close to Wickham as possible. To my right, Justin launched a snowball at Tony, then came closer to me. He whispered, "But you haven't heard anything." I shook my head. That guy Sol. Solien, I said. Yeah. He said they would come. Don't we have to sort of prepare? I scoffed, and we both ducked from a whizzing snowball. How do you suppose we prepare to defend ourselves against 4 of the most gifted vampires in creation? Justin's expression fell. It wasn't like I couldn't relate. I would be utterly defenseless against them. There would be nothing I could do. If the coven comes, they'll be coming for me. If they come for you, they might as well come for me. Will they try to kill you? My gut instinct says no. They don't exactly know I'm human. I had explained the ritual in the best way I could days before. Though it wasn't something that Justin could easily wrap his head around. You said Rhodes' ritual was a secret. Any ideas how he did it? Some, I said. First, you have to be 500 years old, and second, you have to let the other vampire deplete your blood supply. The magic of the ritual lies within the vampire. It's the intent. If your intentions aren't pure, the ritual will fail and you both die. Justin's expression was hard to read. So what do we do? Let's not try to think about it unless we have to, I said. The truth was that if the coven came, which I was beginning to think they would not, it would be them and me. I would leave Justin behind, if I had to protect him. And Tony. A snowball slammed right into Justin's face, covering his eyes and nose with sloppy slush. Yes. I am a snow god. Tony yelled, and started running a lap in the quartz meadow. He ran into Tracy and then tackled her to the ground. Tony. Tracy squealed from the ground. Tony helped pick her up, and then she kissed him on the cheek. Come on, Lena. Claudia called to me. We have to get our hair done. Yeah, I'm all set with getting tackled for the rest of the afternoon, Tracy added. Once Tracy and Tony got together, things with the three-piece and me kind of solidified. It wasn't like I was Tracy's closest girlfriend, but we were civil. I never quite decided if she was really interested in Tony or if she just missed the company of the group. I think she could tell how I felt because she was never mean to me again. Either way, if Tony was happy, I was happy. Tracy kissed Tony goodbye and Claudia, Kate, Tracy, and I left the boys in front of Quartz dorm throwing snowballs at one another. Claudia linked her arm through mine as we walked. Let me guess, Lena, she said. She smiled at me in a knowing way, her eyes fixed on me. Your dress is black, right? I gently pulled her closer to me as we walked up the path toward the dorms. Once we reached Tracy's room, I got dressed. My dress was black and fell down to the tops of my feet. Tony had helped me pick it out. I held a pair of dangling earrings to my face. In the reflection of the mirror, I looked at my hand holding the earrings to my cheeks. My eyes lingered on Rhode's onyx ring. Those are perfect, Lena, Claudia said, distracting me from my thoughts. She looked like a movie star in her hot pink gown. When Claudia left to help Kate and Tracy with their makeup, I had a minute alone. I looked in the full-length mirror on the back of Tracy's door. I was in my dress and wearing the highest black heels I had ever seen. I let my hair fall down past my shoulders, accentuating my long and lean body. The dress clung to my curves. I looked long and hard into my own eyes. I reached behind my neck and unclasped the vial. I raised it into the air and focused in on the tiny glints of gold within the ashes. Anywhere you go, I will go, echoed in my head. I'm sorry, I said to the ashes, and delicately placed the necklace in my purse. Then I looked back at my reflection. I touched the place on my chest where the necklace lay for those many months. Like a faraway drum, I could feel my heart beat under my fingertips. A few minutes later I descended the stairs of the girls' dorm, and we waited in the foyer for the boys to arrive. Curtis and Roy, each in tuxes, turned the corner, each holding a box with a flower inside. Tony was next, and when he saw Tracy he smiled, in the kind of wide-mouthed Tony way that made a warm sensation pool in my chest. He looked at me even though he was hugging Tracy. The love Tony felt for me was evident in the expression on his face, but it was the kind of love that would take us through the rest of our days. The kind of love shared between two best friends. Then Justin, in his tall, languid way, stepped around the corner and into the foyer. We walked slowly toward each other. He was dressed in his tux, his face somehow still bronzed. He smiled at me and I was filled with love, with admiration for his will for life, for the desire to love me and for showing me how to open up again. You are, he said, just inches from me. So beautiful that I can't explain. I looked down. Justin held an orchid in a box that was attached to a wristband. All of the other girls had similar wristbands. It's a corsage, Justin said as he opened the plastic lid. You said. He was nervous, it was so cute. He was looking this way and that. He was actually embarrassed. You said that flowers symbolize different things. So I picked an orchid because it symbolizes love, I finished. The winter prom was held in the Wickham Banquet Hall. You'd think they would shell out. Take us to a hotel or something, Tony complained. We walked as a group up the snaking snow-covered path all the way to the Wickham Banquet Hall. It was a modern building with panoramic windows that looked out at the ocean. In front of the main entrance, delivery cars moved in and out of the campus. We opened the doors and walked down a long hallway. Music was already playing from a DJ booth in the room. When we walked into the banquet hall, I looked up. The hall was filled with white, shimmering snowflakes made out of all different types of material. Silver glitter and disco balls threw thousands of glints of light around the banquet hall. Lining the right side of the room was a panel of windows, and out of it I could see miles and miles of ocean. Well, I couldn't see miles of ocean anymore, but it was there and the moon was shining down on the icy water. You like it? Justin asked, gripping my hand. It's perfect, I said. Soon enough dinner was over and we were dancing so much that my legs hurt. We all danced together in a huge circle. We were impenetrable. Tony started kicking his legs out, doing some ridiculous jig that made him look like he was having a fit. Around us were Ms. Tate and our other teachers, including the insufferable Professor Lin. They watched us from the perimeter of the room. Everyone looked so beautiful, and the music kept almost everyone out of their seats. It was late into the evening and I was sweating like mad. Some of my hair was coming out of its pins, so I left the crazy dance circle to freshen up. I'm gonna go fix my hair, I yelled to Justin with a smile. Justin was glistening with sweat. He nodded and I turned to leave. No, wait, Lena. No peeing or bathroom breaks. You haven't seen my best dance moves yet, Tony said, pushing his butt out in front of Tracy. She wore a brilliant teal blue gown. She slapped Tony's butt in time with the music, and soon I was laughing hysterically. I laughed so hard at Tony and Tracy that once I reached the banquet hall doorway I had to stop a moment to catch my breath. I looked back into the ballroom and blew a kiss at Justin. He smiled and continued to dance with the group. He had to back up to give Tony more room. I took one step into that hallway and the vampire soul within me reawakened. I hadn't felt it in so long, not since that cool October morning in Rhode Island, when Solien came to me. Immediately, my hair felt electric. Even my eyesight felt sharper. Each breath I took felt hot. There was a vampire in the building. I stopped just outside the banquet door. I stood in the hallway and slowly, very slowly, I looked to the right. There, leaning against the wall at the end of the hallway, was Vicken. His hair was cropped short, like a modern-day young man's. His white, pale face made my breath catch. My whole body shook. The hot burning in my eyes that had tormented me for hundreds of years finally and inconsolably came up and with a flourish spread over my cheeks. I brought my fingertips to my face, unbelieving that this was finally my moment to cry. I brought my hand away from my face and looked at the tears. They glistened under the bright, fluorescent lights. Tiny, beautiful drops rolled down my fingers onto my palm. My hands shook, my eyes opened wide. I hadn't seen my own tears in 600 years. Viken walked toward me so slowly that my whole body was shaking by the time he reached me. "So the rumors are true," he said. I had almost forgotten the sound of his voice. His thick Scottish accent and grave tone used to ooze through me, but now it chilled my soul. The rumors he meant were that I was human and the tears had given me away. He rested an elbow on the wall above me and leaned forward so his full lips and wide mouth were millimeters from my own. "A high school? You make a fool of yourself, Highness," he hissed. "If you're here to kill me, then just do it," I said through chattering teeth. My gaze didn't break from his black stare. He bent next to my right ear and whispered, "20 minutes, Lena. Out front. Or the boy dies." I collapsed right there onto the floor. On my knees, I twisted to watch Viken walk down the hallway and disappear out of the double doors without looking back. The music blasted from the ballroom. People were having an amazing time and I was crying with my back to the banquet door. It was clear what I had done after Solien's warning. I had recklessly put myself, Justin, Tony, and all of us at risk. I should have told them all, protected them. Had I learned nothing? Would I always put myself first? I took a few deep breaths. I had to get myself together. I only had 20 minutes. The prom music was so loud and I needed to think. Needed to make choices. The idea of Justin's death was the worst possible image I could conjure. I had lost road and now maybe Justin? I couldn't think of it. I stood up and wiped my eyes. I would say my goodbyes and let fate have me. I had done so many incomprehensible things that it was time that I paid for the bloodshed I'd caused. The loss was now mine. Somehow I managed to stumble back down the hallway. I couldn't stop the tears now. It was too late. I held on to the ballroom doorway to support myself. The DJ played a slow song and while Curtis and Roy paired up with Kate and Claudia, I looked at Tony and Tracy already wrapped around each other. Her nose was nuzzled into the nape of his neck. From the back I could see the way her long eyelashes pointed to the floor. Maybe I had been wrong about her, maybe what we all needed was for someone to care for us. Justin stood up from the chair at our table. When he caught my eye, his smile faded immediately. He jogged across the dance floor toward me. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Dance with me," I said. I didn't want to make a scene and I knew I only had a few minutes left. "Okay," he said, and we walked to the dance floor. Couples surrounded us, and I was momentarily relieved to feel Justin's strong hands around my waist. We started to dance, and the tears started again. "Listen to me. I have to tell you something very important," I said. Every minute counted. "Lena, what's wrong?" He tried to wipe the tears away, but they were pouring down now and I wouldn't have stopped those drops from falling for the world. "The coven," he whispered. "You have to listen to me very carefully." "Okay." Justin nodded. If it's the coven. SHH. I have to get this out, I said. Everything that's happened. Meeting you. What you've done for me. Justin's face was a tragedy. He kept his mouth in a thin line. He had no idea why I was crying. I couldn't explain it. I wouldn't set his anger and determination on a coven of vampires who would murder him in moments. You showed me how to live. Do you know what that means to a vampire? Do you? I don't understand. You brought me back to life. I was crying horribly now and I was almost out of time. I let go of his body and placed my hands on his cheeks. I looked into his eyes for a moment, then kissed him so hard and deep I hoped it would give me the strength to walk away. I have to get some air. Okay? I'll be right back. Real quick. Lena. Right back, I barely choked. I turned away and didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked out of the ballroom and into the long hallway. As I walked away, I lifted my head high, clenched my hands, and pushed out into the freezing night. Directly in front of me on the pathway was my car, the blue luxury car that had been parked outside my dorm room for weeks. Vicken was driving my car. The window came down, and Vicken said, "Get in." The sound of that voice was ice cold. I did as I was told and Vicken pulled away from the banquet hall, zipped through the campus as though he'd been there for years, and pulled out of the school. I looked longingly out the window at Seeker before we turned left and onto Lover's Bay Main Street. I refused to look at him. Instead, I placed a hand on the cold glass as I watched my favorite places zoom by. The candy store, the empty sidewalk where the farmers' market stood, the restaurants and dress shops. "There is much to discuss," he said. "Where are you taking me?" I asked. My voice was a bit stronger. I wasn't going to let him see me cry again. Somehow, in that moment, I knew that Justin was outside the banquet hall calling my name. "Why, darling? We're going home." In a matter of 2 hours we were on a private chartered plane and I was gone. Part 2. My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love as deep, the more I give to thee. The more I have, for both are infinite. Juliet, Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 2. Chapter 25. 2 days after my return to Hathersage, I leaned against a window frame and stared out at the fields through an upper-floor window. Snowflakes barely coated the top of the grass. Behind me, scarlet-colored sheets and a matching comforter covered a claw-footed bed. A crystal decanter sat on a night table, though it was empty. I knew what it would contain soon enough. It was a cloudy day, but a dismal light strayed into the room. The blinds were modern, white, and I had pulled them all the way up. I had considered escaping through the window, though, as a vampire, I had never installed a way to open or shut the house windows. They were bolted closed. The central air system kept the house at a cool 65 degrees. As I said, it was 2 days after the winter prom. While I looked out at the landscape, I thought of Tony dancing with Tracy and the looks on their faces under the glittering lights of the ballroom. I thought of our snow fight and the way coffee tasted as it trickled down my throat. I had been fed well for my first 2 days back in Hathersage, but I was not allowed outside of the mansion. I was given food ordered in from restaurants on the main strip downtown. I didn't even know we had a main strip. I suppose that was something that was developed over the 100 years I was asleep. After we returned from the airport, Vicken walked me into the kitchen of the house and instructed that I call the school and tell them I would not return until the spring. It was only then that I would be able to collect my belongings. No one at Wickham seemed to mind when Vicken offered a hefty sum of money that the administration could not refuse. I wondered if word had spread. I wondered if Justin had knocked on my door, waiting, hoping that somehow I would answer. I continued to look out the window. The grass meadows still stretched as far as I could see. My precious fields had been spared modern-day development. "Evil be he who thinketh evil," Vicken said from the doorway behind me, though I did not turn around. "Do you still believe that?" he asked. He sauntered into the room. I was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, though from the quality of the clothing I knew these were top of the line. Vicken never spared any expense on fashion. I turned from the window and rested my back on the cold glass. It was hard to deny Vicken's power. He held his strength in his control, the slow movements, the calculated gaze. I had forgotten the sharp angle of his jaw and the strong point of his chin. I used to love to run my hand along his spine and ask him to name the constellations just so I could forget myself a while. No, even then, standing in front of that window, I did not forget why I chose Vicken. "I told you, if you're going to kill me, then just do it," I said. I was surprised to see that the rest of the coven had taken up residence in the doorway. Gavin on the right, Heath on the left, and Song in the hallway. "Rode always kept his papers here," Vicken said. I stared them all down despite the fact that every molecule in my body pulsated with fear. Yet, there was nothing. Nothing in that room, save the one scrap we found in the ashes of the fireplace, Vicken continued. He fingered the comforter between his index and thumb. He really had no intention of returning. The way Vicken said it, it was almost a question, though I would never answer. Vicken turned to the eyes of the coven. "Leave us," he said quietly. They followed his command and shut the door. He leaned on the opposite side of the window. He left no trace. No information about how to raise you from your hibernation. I should have known. Vicken ran his hand through his hair. When I didn't respond or even move my gaze from his, he jumped at me and clutched the back of my head and kissed me. I thought I would lose my breath. His lips pressed mine apart. His tongue, cold and tasteless, rapped against my own. I thought of Justin and I thought of the night after the club and the easy way he lifted me so my legs wrapped around his waist. Vicken pushed me away from him so my back hit the frosty glass window. "You dare think of that pathetic human," he spat. My heart beat in my chest as though to remind me just how much it wanted to be there. How badly it needed for me to stay alive. I forgot that Vicken's love for me was a curse, a link that would make him unable to kill me. He could make me a vampire easily and that would kill me, but he could not hurt me for his own gain. This was the magic, and it had betrayed him. "Oh," he laughed, though it sounded more like a cackle. "Pathetic human. My apologies." He shot one more glance at me as he paced the room. I sat down on the bed and looked at my feet. The heels of Vicken's shoes clicked on the wooden floor, then he was standing across from me. "My God! Look at you! I'm at a loss what to do." The most powerful vampire in the world cannot even look her minions in the eye. Pathetic. I knew this tactic. Beat them down emotionally, then they'll fold. They'll want to be released from their pain. This was just phase 1. But I didn't care. I was numb. Rode hadn't meant to leave evidence. He had done so much to protect me. He even erased all of the evidence of the ritual. Say something, Vicken commanded, his voice rising. I have nothing to say, I said, finally looking up. Why aren't you afraid? He yelled so the chandelier shook. Put up a fight. Death is inevitable either way, I said, though my voice betrayed my intentions. It wavered a little. Vicken walked slowly and sat down on the bed to my right. We held each other's gaze, and the blackness behind Vicken's eyes reminded me that there was no soul inside the man in front of me. All I hoped was that the love Vicken felt for me was going to, in even some small way, make this less painful than it needed to be. You are not afraid to die? He asked. I could see him looking at the base of my neck and then back up at my eyes. I shook my head, and a single tear escaped down my right cheek. Vicken watched it roll down to the base of my chin, hunger in his eyes. What all vampires wouldn't give for one tear to escape, what freedom to release the pain, even for one moment. Why not? He asked. I looked at Vicken. I mean, really looked at him. Somewhere underneath the monster was the boy who loved maps and navigation. Who fought in a war and sang bar songs in a tavern. Because I finally lived. Vicken broke eye contact with me, leaned forward, and pressed his lips against my neck. He started out kissing me, tiny pecks along the nape of my neck, then my throat, until he was staring straight into my eyes. In a blink he ripped the nape of my neck, sucking my blood with such force, I couldn't breathe. My heartbeat sounded in my ears. The rhythm, it was all I could hear until it began to wane. There was no pain, just hot, sticky breath around my neck where Vicken sucked the life blood out of me. Soon, I would be a vampire and I would only desire pain and hate. My fingers started to tingle and go numb, and the muscles in my neck contracted in pain so sharp I could barely keep my head up. Vicken held my head into the palms of his hands. Then the gurgling breath started, the blood rose and seeped up through my lungs. I concentrated on thoughts instead. That is, while I still had my mind. The mind was the last to go. Justin's face at the winter prom. The sway of his hips in time with mine as we moved slowly on the dance floor. The constant smell of fresh grass on his skin and the pout of his lips. My eyesight failed next, and the images I saw were only in my mind. I saw Vicken the night I took him in Scotland. I watched his father cup his cheek in his hand. I should have let him go to be with his family. Even though he was murdering me, I wished him peace and freedom. Last, my hearing went and the sucking sounds were silent. In the quiet, I saw Rode. I wished, more than anything, that his soul, wherever it was protected. That he was free of worry and pain. I hoped that all souls could go to heaven, even vampires who were victims of their own evil. Maybe, one day, I could go, too. And in that moment of death, I thought that maybe I would never be absolved of my atrocities, that maybe I would die and the transformation would go wrong. Wouldn't be so bad, would it? I made thousands live it. If I died, I wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. I wouldn't murder or defile. Then everything was black. When I awoke, I blinked twice. Wherever I was lying on my back. I would have thought I was in the bedroom with Vicken, but above me was the sky. The sky was too blue, almost as though it was colored in with a sea blue paint, the color of very deep ocean. There was no sun, though it was clearly daytime. My hands lay at my sides. I looked down. Grass was all around me. But it was sharp and too green. I looked down at my legs. I was wearing the green dress, the evergreen one, from the last Nude Rouge. I sat up. Quickly my vampire sight was back. It was the fields at my home in England, but it was different. Dreamlike. I was at the bottom of the hill in Hathersage, and ahead, a mile or so, a familiar herd of deer ran through the open fields. If the deer were here, the green dress, could it be possible that? My heart, in that moment, must have shattered. I spun around on the spot. There at the top of the hill was road. I smiled, all my teeth showed and the sides of my mouth hurt. Tears rushed to my eyes but, as expected, they did not fall. There was no pain, maybe this was heaven. There he stood. Road wore a long overcoat and his hair was short and spiky as it had been the last time I saw him at Wickham School. He looked healthy and alive. I held the sides of my dress and hurried up the hill. Although my Hathersage home should have been behind him, there was just a meadow spread as far as the eye could see. It looked very much like the one in front of Quartz Dorm. I was mesmerized. I couldn't take my eyes off of his. The joy coursing through me, the sheer amazement of seeing him in front of me, was a universe I couldn't understand. Was there a way for me stay here forever? I wouldn't question it. Having an adventure? Rode asked when we were face to face. Just inches from each other. Are you really here? My voice was all breath. He placed a warm hand on my right cheek. Suddenly, shame pooled in my chest. You must be so disappointed in me, I said, not breaking eye contact. Disappointed? Rode clarified with a smile in his eyes. Just the opposite. I failed you. Vicken remade me a vampire. I'm almost sure of it. Our time is limited, so I must be brief, he responded. Rode started to walk, and I kept pace with him along the edge of the hill where the fields and the Wickham-like meadow met. Tell me, he said. What did you think of when Vicken was remaking you? I don't know. I don't want to talk about that. You're here. I held Rode's hand as we walked. I never wanted to let go. You must, Lena. Think. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my thoughts. Justin's face flashed in my mind, his smile at winter prom, Tony dancing and kicking his legs out. Then I thought of Vicken's family and his Scottish home and, of course, Rode, in my mother and father's orchard. I hadn't thought of telling Rode about Justin. It was odd to think I could tell Rode about loving anyone besides him. I thought of you. That wherever you were I wished you were safe. Rode's eyes told me to continue. Then I thought of Vicken. That I wish I had left him that night. He should have lived his life. I stopped again. Rode's slight smile said he already knew about Justin. Actually, I thought of Justin first. that I was sorry for the pain I was putting him through. Actually all my friends, for hurting them. Why are you asking me this? Rode breathed a sigh of relief. Because you succeeded. And it has made all the difference in the world. I don't understand, I said. Where are we? Do all vampires come here? No. I sent for you. Though I knew the call would not be answered unless you were able to pass this test. And you did, even better than I thought possible, he said, and then paused. He was staring at me with such intensity that it made all the world blurry. Nowhere else existed in that moment but the blue of Rhodes' eyes. I come to you with a warning, he said. The coming months are going to be filled with unbelievable challenges. You will be given certain, he hesitated, gifts. Ones that will be powerful and dangerous. Do not be afraid of using them, whatever you do. They are going to save your life. I'll be a vampire when I wake up from this. Evil again. My breath caught in my throat. Will I kill those I love? Justin? Tony? I gripped my chest at the thought. You must remember what I told you. No matter what it is, the intent that matters. But I'll be evil. It won't matter. I think you will find that is not possible this time. Rode ran a hand across my cheek, seemingly lost in a new thought. I missed you, he whispered. He refocused on my eyes. Then he looked to the sky, seeing something that I could not. Why do you think I asked what you thought of during Vicken's ritual? He was looking at me again. I shook my head. Out of the corner of my eye I could see that the herd of deer were close, maybe only 20 feet away. Vicken was taking your life, yet you thought of his tragedy. You mourned for him. Then you thought of me, not to blame me but in the hope that somehow I was at peace. And Justin, this boy? You wanted to save him from pain and grief. There was no thought of yourself. I've done that enough. It's the intent, he said, leaning forward. Never forget that. He kissed my forehead. When he did, I closed my eyes for a brief second. When I opened them, Rode was backing away toward the direction of the quartz meadow. Will I remain human? Rode stopped. No, love. Even I cannot control a magic that ancient. He pointed into the meadow. Look, he said. Dear. When I turned, one of them was so close I could have pet the top of his head. When I looked back, Rode was much farther away, though I could still see his face. You're leaving. My eyes went wide, and I took a step forward. On the contrary, you are. He backed away some more. I ran toward him, but somehow he was so much farther than I could reach, so I stopped after a few paces. There's so much I want to say. I miss you. Rode smirked in response. He was almost out of my sight. Will I see you? My voice cracked. Do not be surprised by your greatness, Lena Bodanti, Rode called. Be surprised that no one expected it. Chapter 26. One blink. Then another. With my eyes closed, I ran my tongue over my teeth. They were smooth like ice. I opened my eyes. The ceiling tiles were gleaming black. I turned my head to my right to see the night table. On it a crystal decanter was filled with deep red blood. I picked it up, ignoring the goblet next to it, and drank directly from the opening. I drank it fast. The blood was thick, thicker than tree sap and full of iron. It smelled like rust and tasted like heaven, and I let it fill me. But after 2 or 3 gulps, I found that I was full. Bursting, actually, so that I couldn't take one more sip. Odd. Before, as a vampire, I would need cups and cups, at least a body's worth, to feel this full, usually every few days. Now, all I needed were 3 sips. I placed the decanter back on the night table. I had my ESP back. It was quiet and I knew the coven was awaiting my awakening. I let my arms move slowly and I touched items delicately so as to not make a sound. A few moments alone were exactly what I needed to reacquaint myself with my surroundings. What did Rode mean by gifts? As I let the questions about my brief encounter with Rode swirl in my mind, I lowered myself back onto the bed so I wouldn't make the mattress squeak. I recognized my old armoire. I was sure Vicken had filled it with clothes for me. On the wall across from the bed was a flat-screen television and on the night table, a remote control. I could see the fibers in the floor as well as the microscopic air bubbles in the paint on the ceiling. There was a laptop, a desk made of the finest mahogany, and the shine in the wooden floor almost burned my My appraisal of the room stopped immediately. I realized, I was completing human thoughts. I had retained my soul. Ha! I giggled with my mouth open, then threw my hands over my mouth. I needed some more time alone to consider this. It was night, most likely 8 or 9 p.m. I could tell from the brightness of the stars outside. I sat up and pulled the curtains closed. I noticed that on the floor to the left of my bed was my prom clutch. I didn't even need to look. Inside was some money, the prom ticket, Rhodes vial, and the dried thyme that Solian had given me. I slipped it under my pillow. My legs were firm, my abs tight. I was rock hard and vampire-like. Yet my mind was 100% human. I lay down on the bed and stretched my legs out. Nothing had a texture anymore. No fabric could run along my arm and affect my nerves, sending chills. I was numb again, but, from my memory, I knew this bed was soft. I waited and listened, but my heart was silent. I refocused on the ceiling tiles. Do not be surprised by your greatness, Lena Bodanti. Be surprised that no one expected it. What did this mean? I was a vampire who apparently needed only minimal blood to survive, and I was able to keep my human thoughts. Were these my gifts? Seemed like an odd combination. I reached to turn on the lamp on the night table when a blast of light shone on the curtain pulled across the window. I sat up, my back rigid. I looked left at a dresser with a mirror on top of it and then looked right at the night table. The furniture was shrouded in darkness. There was only one lamp, the one next to me on the night table, and it was off. Where did that light come from? I reached underneath the lampshade to turn it on again. My palm faced out toward the window and my fingers curled beneath the lampshade. Another blast of light illuminated the curtain. That's when I felt the heat emanating from my palms. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at my hands. My vampire sight was back in full force and I could see all the tiny pores in my skin. Except, when I brought them close to my eyes, they were different. My pores were glittering. An odd shimmer, as though the pores were filled with light. I stood up. Anxiety flowed through my skin. With the blood giving me energy, I stared at my palms and threw my arms out as hard as I could. I stretched my fingers so my palms were tight. Light came through my hands and fingertips and out onto the wall and curtains. I did it again. Light as bright as the morning sun. Then there was a knock on the door. I spun around, shoving my hands under my arms. Lena. I heard Gavin's voice and the bedroom doorknob turned. He was always the softest of the four. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to hold up my guard. They couldn't know I had retained my soul. If they did, I would be killed instantly. That was part of the orchestration of the magic of the coven. If one of the coven retained even a semblance of their humanity, it meant they were weak. Weakness had to be killed and then replaced. I constructed the coven so that we would be powerful with nothing to hold us back. I had to be evil, like them. After all, they were expecting their queen. "Come in," I said, turning to face the door. My hair fell past my shoulders, and I continued to hold my hands across my chest, my palms protected under my arms. Gavin was at least 6 feet, with boyish features. I had made him a vampire in 1740 in England. Gavin left the door open behind him. He bowed, just slightly, so I could see the top of his short brown hair. "How do you feel?" he asked. I walked toward him, not breaking eye contact. I stopped and kissed his cheek. "Perfect," I said with a devious grin and walked out the door. Keeping my mind focused, I walked down the hallway. I admit, while I was at Wickham, I forgot about the glory of my mansion. It was 4 floors, each with a different theme. This floor was for my own personal use. I had some rooms decorated only with velvet, some in black onyx. I had a private bedroom, a study, a sitting room, and a bathroom, though I never used it. My favorite room was the weapons room a few floors down. As I walked, I could hear Gavin's footsteps behind me. At the bottom of a grand staircase, standing with his arms crossed over his chest, was Vicken, and on either side of him, as though standing guard, were Heath and Song. I linked my hands behind Vicken's shoulders and pulled him toward me. We embraced while the others looked on. He pulled away from me just enough to look in my eyes. The love he felt for me surged through my arms and spread through my new body like a comforting heat. But I knew on my side, it was broken. When Road had made me human, the bond between us broke apart. I hoped while locked in his gaze that he wouldn't be able to tell. "Welcome back," he said, stepping back and gripping my forearms. His touch was earnest and I could sense that indeed they were all happy. I embraced each vampire, making sure to look each in the eye to assure them that I was the evil vampire Lena once again. I kept my head focused and my eyes still. As we walked into the living room, I stole one glance at the falling snow out the window and felt a wrench in my heart. I could not allow this. The coven and I were linked again in magic, and they might be able to sense what I was thinking. Vicken tugged at my hand and held me back. "Is it really you?" he asked as the others started a fire and organized our chairs in the living room. Vicken's glance was needy. He truly had transformed me back into a vampire for himself. Something I would have done. "Fool," I said, and took his hand and led him into the living room. He cackled and gripped my hand in return. There was nothing. No burning in my cheeks. No desire for food. There was only a relentless desire to go back. If Rode could wield the ritual, why couldn't I? I needed something to keep me occupied, to find a way to return home. To Wickham. I spent my days researching Rode's ritual. It helped time pass and it gave me an excuse to be alone. I made up all kinds of information to mislead the coven. I lied about how much I knew about the ritual. I claimed to have awakened at Wickham and Rode was already gone. I said anything to throw them off. Vicken had a particular interest in the ritual and spent many days by my side while I worked in the library. Days passed, then weeks. Snow fell and the coven threw parties in my honor. I did not venture out of the house. Truth be told, I'm not exactly sure I was allowed. The coven orchestrated my schedule. One day I would come downstairs to dead bodies strewn about the living room, and the next I would find the coven reading, surrounded by books. Was I really happy with this before? Of course I could have overruled them at any time. I made them, I created the magic that bound them together, though I didn't test my boundaries nor did they. If I had, my true nature would have been revealed and the hierarchy would have been broken. It was the rule. If a vampire in our coven retained her humanity, her capability to think rationally, she would have to be killed. It wouldn't have mattered if I were their queen or not. If I retained my humanity in any form, I weakened the link. I wasn't sure exactly what had happened to me out on that field with Rode. At first, I drank 1 glass of blood every few days. I didn't ask the boys where they got it. I allowed them to provide it for me. Selfish, yes, but I knew what I needed and had no interest in killing anyone. Over time, the desire for blood waned. I only needed it once a week, then once a month. By April 1st, I had 1 glass of blood and found myself full. Just 1 glass for the entire month. The coven continued to bring me blood, but I disposed of it in the sink. Like I said, everything was heightened: my sight, my ability to comprehend thoughts, so reading was quick and easy. I was a super vampire. It was the end of April when I began to worry that Vicken suspected that I was not myself. I was in the library, which was on the first floor of the mansion. I sat at a long table, and a fire roared behind me. It would have been silent if not for the rain pelting the windows. Ancient candles in tall iron holders stretched up and down the table. The book I was reading was written in Hebrew. I read it from right to left and followed the text. The vampire can only break the bonds of the vampire existence in the 500th year. I already knew this. Rode discovered that a vampire had to be 500 years old or else the ritual wouldn't work. I slammed the book closed. Dust from the ancient cover flew into the air, sending dust particles into the candle flames. In 3 months, I had acquired nothing I didn't already know. Reading again. I looked up. Vicken walked from the doorway down the length of the long table and sat down across from me. "Had any luck?" he asked. He wore a crooked smile. "If I said yes, that I uncovered that ritual, what would you do?" Vicken folded his hands on the table and then leaned forward. "I'd want to go wherever you are. Which is why I am here, in the library." "Well," I said, looking back to the book in front of me, Even if I found something, I couldn't wield it. The ritual calls for the vampire performing it to be 500 years old. You were very powerful. Perhaps age isn't an issue for you. What are you saying? Don't you think it would work, anyway? I leaned forward. Are you suggesting I attempt it despite the chance that I would die a painful death if it didn't work? Viken said nothing. In some small way my response had overruled his position and he dared not challenge me. I flipped back open the book to a random page. I looked down at the ink but didn't focus on the words on the page. I've found nothing, I said. Perhaps you are not looking in the right places, he said, looking at the flames of the candles and then at me. You know, we installed lights when they discovered electricity. And television and computers, I said, leaning into the chair back. Tell me what you've found. I know you've found something. You've been looking for months. I kept my gaze fixed on Viken. A hunch, he confessed, without me even asking. My position as his maker made it impossible for him to conceal this information from me. Something else came with that confession, an emotion I was not expecting to feel from him: longing. Why are you so invested? It would be ages before you could use the ritual. What was your life like at Wickham? I admit I was shocked by the honesty of the question. My immediate reaction came in images: the green campus, Justin pushing through the water after he won the boat race, and Tony's painting. Are you angry that I did not take you with me? I asked. His gaze was mesmerizing and I knew how Viken felt immediately. His emotions came over me in waves. He wasn't angry. He was devastated that he wasn't informed of the plan to make me human. Do you want to be human? I asked. You've never expressed that before. You were gone, he said, leaning back in the chair. I hadn't thought about my humanity until I realized you wouldn't be here with me every day. Only then did I desire to go back. We can't go back, Viken. Even with the ritual. Not really. Every age will always be a world we were never meant to participate. There was a silence between us. Though there was something in the air, it felt heavy. Perhaps it was the many memories and intentions experienced within that library. Or perhaps it was all the invisible years that had passed between Viken and me while at each other's side. You are not as you were before, he said. You are different. I leaned forward again despite the anxiety creeping under my dead heart. I warned you that I had changed in my human existence. You fooled yourself into thinking I would be the same. You do not feed or even desire to inflict pain. How are you able to deal with your thoughts? Viken asked. I got up from the table and replaced the book. I gathered another couple in its place and set them down on the table while Viken watched me. What I choose to do at my own pace, Viken, is not your concern. Viken sat back, his dark features focusing on the table. Of course, he whispered, getting up. Before he reached the doorway, he said, Tonight, a special treat for you, Lena. I watched him leave and then I opened another book. At night I kept to myself. I ignored the knocks on my door or the calls of my name up the staircase. It was when the coven was occupied that I could think about Wickham campus. The trees. Justin's face. How my heart ached. How I wanted to punch through the windows and run out onto the fields until I couldn't run anymore. I tried to dream of Rhodes again, but that visitation, or whatever it was a one-time thing. Precious, even. I knew, now, he would be gone forever. When I was alone in my room, I practiced. I stretched my fingers wide, and light emanated out from me in a strong beam. I once accidentally clapped my hands together and the blast was so big, I fell back onto the floor and cracked the vanity mirror. Luckily, the coven was not at home when that occurred. That night, Vicken had promised me a special treat. I watched the luxury car the coven drove snake out of the driveway. I took this as my opportunity to go and look in Rhodes' room as I hadn't been able to up until this moment. It would have been a place where I couldn't keep my mind focused. Now, with the coven momentarily on an errand, I ascended the stairs to the topmost floor. The room was the only one on the floor at the end of a long hallway. I walked, step by step, and finally stood in front of it. I pressed my hand on the door and it creaked open. Rhodes' iron bed frame held only a stripped mattress. The walls were bare and the only thing on the floor was an oriental rug. I tiptoed in as though making a sound would disturb the peace in the barren bedroom. I sat down on the mattress. But there was nothing he left behind. Could he have been so foolish not to consider the possibility that perhaps Vicken would find me? Across the room from the bed was a closet. Only hangers adorned the clothing rail. Hold on, yes, there was something in the closet on the wall. An engraving on the wood at the back of the closet. An engraving of a sun and moon. I got up and walked closer. I stepped into the open closet and stood inches away from the engraving. I knew the coven had seen these drawings. The images of Gavin and Heath running their hands along the walls came directly to my mind. I stayed and looked, even though they would have already discovered it if anything was special about the engravings. Perhaps Rhodes' belief about intent was relevant here, too. If their intent was to find the ritual and use it, they would never find it. More magic. Instinctually, I raised my right hand and knocked on the wall. First, the sun. It sounded solid. Just when my skin hit the wood, I realized that Vicken, too, had stood in this spot examining the engravings. "Stay," said a voice in my mind. A voice that sounded just like Rhodes. I knocked on the sun shape again. This time when my knuckle tapped it, like a child's shape game, the sun moved out of place in the wood. I used my fingertips to grip the circular shape and tried to wiggle it out of the wall. One wrong move and it could fall back into the wood or perhaps get stuck. When I finally got my fingernails dug into the wooden shape, I slid it out. The small sun with its spiky perimeter lay in the palm of my hand. Behind it, in the blackness of the interior of the wall, was a piece of parchment, rolled with a red ribbon. The creeping feeling of the coven's presence entered my mind. They were on their way back. I could see them in my head. I concentrated on the parchment. I unrolled it and found 2 pages. The first was a recipe. Ingredients: amber resin, white candles, blood from a vampire no younger than 500 years. I read the recipe. I would need assorted herbs, thyme, and a silver knife to complete the ritual. At the bottom it said, in bold handwriting, Rhodes' handwriting, intent. On the second page was a poem. At closer look, I realized it was a chant. The chant that Rhodes must have said while completing the ritual. I release you underscore 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 underscore, name of vampire. Vampire must now slice the wrist with a silver blade. I release you underscore 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 underscore. I stand as your guardian. I cast away my being to you. Vampire should allow other to take life blood. I cast away my life. Take on this blood. Believe, and be free. Beneath the chant, which was easy, really, were special instructions about the candles and the herbs I needed to burn before the ritual. At the bottom of the page there was one more sentence and I knew Road hadn't failed me. Lena, be safe. I didn't know if Road's words were meant for me to find or if they were just the thoughts he had in the moment and he wrote them down on the paper. I hoped he meant them for me. Lena. It was Heath calling me from the first floor landing. I stuffed Road's papers in the pockets of my pants. Lena. I called back and descended. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks, a link is provided in the video description.